Ambassador and Prashad, friends. In this session on India and China rise, I have been asked to speak on the theme of current challenges in India-China relations. When we talk of challenges in India-China relations, let me begin by underlining the fact that, in fact, over the last 25 years, the basic approach that India has followed in its China policy is predicated on frank acknowledgement of the fact that we have a fraught relationship with China, full of challenges. And the template has been to try and compartmentalize the outstanding issues, including the boundary question, deal with them to the extent possible, but by and large try not to let them affect the tenor of developmental relations between the two countries. The two countries have constantly sought to add positive content to the mix and not allowed negatives to dominate the agenda of bilateral discourse. I'll suggest that this has been a pragmatic approach which has yielded reasonably positive outcomes. And it has also seen investment on part of leaders of both countries, as can be seen from the frequency of high-level visits, including over the last few months. In fact, the report card of our ties with China is stronger than many assume. India-China relations have developed in a fairly comprehensive manner, notwithstanding problems and issues. Let me illustrate this point so that one can put challenges in a better perspective. One fact is that there has been extensive growth in exchanges between India and China across the entire spectrum of interface, and the relations have transitioned out of a state of abnormalcy and gradually accumulated attributes of normal state-to-state relations. The second aspect, which is often underestimated, is the importance of ensuring that India-China border areas are peaceful. Notwithstanding the fact that we have huge difference to the boundary question, we don't even agree on the length of boundary between India and China. We differ on the alignment LAC. We have frequent occurrence of patrols not only coming face to face, but sometimes going behind each other. But border areas have remained peaceful because of CBMs that have been put in place very assiduously since 1993. But there are three issues here I wanted to highlight. One, the process of search for a boundary settlement has stalled since the agreement on political parameters and guiding principles that was reached in April 2005. Two, likewise, China has stymied the process of LAC clarification, even though there is a categorical understanding between two countries to move towards common understanding of the LAC, which is also required to ensure that CBMs agreed to between two countries are fully implemented. Three, China has also walked back from the early understanding that LAC will be the basis for trans-border interactions, including with regard to border trade or pilgrimage, visas, a whole lot of other issues. For India, another related challenge is that how to maintain peace and tranquility in border areas without losing ground, given the huge asymmetry that has developed between border infrastructure and capabilities of two countries. Third positive aspect I wanted to highlight is that there is a major economic component in the relationship between 2000 and 2012. Bilateral trade developed nearly 20-fold. But since then, trade has tended to decline. We have in fact reached limits of the earlier model that relied on increasingly asymmetric trade expansion. In last couple of years, investment, e-commerce and services have emerged as new drivers of economic relations with China, as trade in goods, especially our exports to China, has stagnated. This ongoing transition has benefited from a key decision taken by the government under Prime Minister Modi, that is to leverage China's capabilities to advance our domestic developmental agenda through participation of Chinese companies, other entities in infrastructure, manufacturing, skill development, and other sectors, shedding the earlier hesitation in this regard. This shift is also underpinned by the rebalancing in Chinese economy, which places greater emphasis on overseas direct investment, services sector, and innovation. Thus, there are push and pull factors driving this change in economic engagement in India and China. At the same time, there are now serious concerns in India about the lopsided, unsustainable nature of trade relations between two countries. In fact, last year, our trade deficit with China was $52 billion, in trade turnover $71 billion. In first 6 months of the current fiscal year, our trade deficit with China is whopping 62% of our global trade deficit, which clearly not going to last for too long. Fourth point I wanted to highlight is that subnational cooperation involving provinces and states on two sides, cities, is emerging as a potent instrument for scaling up bilateral engagement, particularly in trade, investment, and culture. Looking beyond bilateral engagement, the two countries have built upon their shared interests and concerns to develop a cooperative agenda on multilateral and global issues. Just to give an example, India and China are two countries that have gained a lot from an open, rule-based global trading system. Equally, they have most to lose if it breaks down. Look at what's happening around us. Foreign Secretary's remarks this morning, Brexit, victory of Donald Trump on anti-open trade platform, and you can see that there is a much greater degree of convergence of interest between India and China on these issues than is readily recognized. While there are these gains in relations between India and China that I wanted to highlight, there are major challenges which are leading to a situation today when the relationship between India and China is under considerable stress. While there has been incremental but limited progress in addressing contentious matters, we are today faced with an accumulation of issues and concerns ranging from the boundary question to trans-border rivers to staple visas for residents of Arunachal Pradesh to China's unhelpful attitude on India's membership of UN Security Council NSG, which is affecting the broader narrative of India-China relations, and it's also affecting ability of two countries to work together on regional and multilateral issues. The point to note here is that bilateral differences have today acquired greater salience as the convergence between the two countries on larger geopolitical issues has declined. Bilateral issues have been around, as I mentioned earlier, but today these issues are getting much greater focus in discourse on India-China relations. Another point to note is that the future directions for relations with China will increasingly be shaped by the course taken by the rise of China, the parallel but less spectacular rise of countries like India, Indonesia, and other countries, and the related issue of the rapidly changing dynamics of the geopolitical landscape around us, particularly in the Asia-Pacific region. Foreign Secretary summed up the current landscape and highlighting the point that how fluid, how unpredictable this landscape is, and India-China relations will have to be pursued as part of this uncertain landscape. As Professor Garber brought out in his remarks, we are today dealing with a China which is prepared to deploy its considerable political, economic, military, and diplomatic clout accumulated over the last 3 decades in pursuit of its strategic objectives. At the same time, it's also a country at an inflection point, adjusting to new normal, not only in its economy as is the official narrative, but also in its polity and diplomacy and security policies. The new normal in politics and diplomacy involves, as Professor Gawa highlighted, emergence of the co-leader in Xi Jinping, who is pursuing his ambitious Chinese dream. China under Xi seeks primacy in the Asia-Pacific region, emphasizes nationalism, and is not at all shy to leverage capabilities it has acquired. Under Xi, China is also seeking to shape its neighborhood through its Belt and Road initiative, which is a connectivity agenda, but perhaps more than that, a geopolitical play. China's assertive foreign policy has generated considerable concern as also pushback from the USA, regional powers, and neighbors, as you are aware. China's rise has caused balancing throughout the Asia-Pacific. The balance of power in Asia is shifting, but a new equilibrium is yet to emerge. And this element of unpredictability has become even more pronounced after the recent presidential elections in USA. As Jayashankar mentioned, we may expect the terms of USA's engagement with the outside world to be redefined in a fairly significant manner. While we may expect President Trump to act differently from what candidate Trump had promised, question marks abound. Will he follow up on his campaign rhetoric on China? Will the US cede geopolitical space to China under the Trump presidency, or, as I suspect is more likely, peace through strength strategy and 350-ship US Navy proposed by him translate into further pushback to China in the Asia-Pacific? It will take some time before we have some clarity on these issues, but the point I wanted to highlight here that this broader context in the Asia-Pacific region in particular will increasingly shape the future trajectory of India-China relations. While India has disavowed interest in being part of any containment strategy directed against China, like others in the region, India too is hedging to deal with uncertainty associated with the rise of China. Obviously, India will prefer multipolar Asia and not one dominated by a single country. Increasingly, as Kalyan mentioned in his opening remarks, there will be elements of cooperation and competition in India's dealings with China, and how we manage this mix is going to be the big challenge in management of our relations with China. A subset of this complex situation is how do we manage the simultaneous re-emergence of China and India. India has long acknowledged the fact of the rise of China. China is also gradually coming around to acknowledging the inevitable rise of India. In fact, last year, during run-up to Prime Minister Modi's visit to China, we worked on a basic political understanding on how to deal with the phenomenon of simultaneous re-emergence of India and China as two major powers in the region and the world. The basic understanding was that it should unfold in a mutually supportive manner, with both sides showing mutual respect and sensitivity to each other's concerns, interests, and aspirations. Yet, what was agreed was only aspirational in character. The ground reality is far more complex, and far more work needs to be done to substantiate it in concrete terms. An important aspect of simultaneous rise of India and China, an aspect which has been covered both by Professor Gawa and Mr. Beckevold, is that the areas of influence of India and China overlap, and there will be growing interaction, increasing competition between them in the shared periphery. As China's global footprint is expanding, so its political, economic, and strategic presence in India's immediate and extended neighborhood. China is not averse to positioning itself as a countervailing force vis-a-vis India and its neighborhood, and our South Asian neighbors are also inclined to play the so-called China card to get some advantage in dealings with India. The Belt and Road Initiative has been talked about by earlier panelists. In our South Asian region, it has introduced new element in China's engagement with broadly positive response from the subcontinent, save from India and Bhutan. China-Pakistan strategic linkages are getting consolidated. One can in fact argue that China has doubled down on strategic investment in Pakistan, not really taking on board India's concerns, including, as Foreign Secretary reminded, in the context of China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which passes through Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. A related aspect is China's growing footprint in the Indian Ocean region. Both Professor Gawa and Mr. Beckerwold highlighted the geopolitical significance of this development. In fact, if you look at the first white paper on military strategy brought out by China in May 2015, it defines as China's stated policy becoming a maritime power which will secure its overseas interests as a strategic objective. China is investing heavily in maritime infrastructure in the region and constructing its first naval base in Djibouti. I'll suggest this is just the beginning. What's happening in Djibouti will be precursor to emergence of more such logistics hubs or bases. It's your pick how you want to describe it. Beginning perhaps with Pakistan, there again is a good choice from Gwadar to Karachi to Ormara, but not only Pakistan, it will happen elsewhere as well. There are clear trends suggesting that we will be facing increased Chinese military presence closer to us in the maritime domain, apart from along our land borders. I'll suggest that China will be for us a maritime neighbor as far as our geopolitical interests are concerned. Footprints of the Indian Navy and the PLA Navy will increasing overlap, both in the Indian Ocean region and in the Western Pacific. We'll have to therefore devise strategies to cope with this emerging situation, which I suggest should also include developing the habit of the maritime forces of two countries working together. While we have our anxieties vis-a-vis China, China have their own set of concerns, some of which were referred to by earlier panelists. For instance, their anxieties about India's defense and security policies, particularly its expanding engagement with the USA, Japan, and Vietnam. The point I wanted to highlight here is that China acknowledges that India pursues an independent foreign policy. That's the official line, including reflected in strategic Chinese literature. China would not obviously like India to move too close to the USA or Japan, but China is not, as comes out very clearly in writings in China, willing to pay a significant price to achieve this objective. China is less than inclined to meaningfully accommodate India's concerns to prevent this shift, geopolitical shift towards the West or Japan. Keeping in mind the issues and concerns on both sides, the complexity of the present geostrategic challenges, and the risk of the two countries falling into the trap of strategic rivalry, which I believe neither re-emergence of China and India will have to be managed through better strategic communication accommodation in respect of specific theaters, situation, issues, building on the broad political consensus that was reached in May 2015 during Prime Minister Modi's visit to China. In our approach towards China, we also have to factor in the negative asymmetry, the economic and military strength of India and China. While India seeks to narrow this still widening gap, it has to work with others to compensate for its relative disadvantage. If China is not seen to be responsive to its concerns, Indian policymakers will come under increasing pressure, as Mr. Beckerwold suggested, there will be much greater incentive for them to develop corresponding pressure points and leverages which China respects. The response may be calibrated, it may be asymmetric in terms of choice of issues and theaters where India can act in a cost-effective manner. Likewise, India cannot obviously match the Chinese armed forces numbers or overall strength. It must therefore focus on building asymmetric capabilities to offset the Chinese advantage. At the same time, I would suggest both India and China have stakes in avoiding turbulence in the relations. This will require strategic maturity on both sides. It's important to look at overall direction of relations and avoid knee-jerk reactions to individual events, as seems to be happening all too often, have happened recently in the present media-driven age. Notwithstanding these challenges, I would suggest that both India and China still consider this to be a period of opportunity in their relations. Both have a shared desire to project bilateral relations in a relatively positive light, though for different set of reasons. This is despite the fact that they harbor doubts about each other's strategic intentions. One can argue that India-China relations today, poised at a new starting point, which marks a more complex phase in the relationship, involving evolving mix of cooperation and competition between two countries with asymmetrical capabilities in a complex and shifting geopolitical environment. Managing this relationship, ensuring that it remains essentially on a constructive track, will possibly be one of the most important challenges of India's foreign policy. I'll conclude here. Thank you.